What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? For over 4 centuries, the fate of more than 100 English settlers has remained one of the greatest mysteries in American colonial history. On Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina, Governor John White's group vanished sometime between 1587 and 1590, leaving behind only the cryptic carvings CROATAN and CROATOAN. Despite repeated searches, no definitive trace of the colonists emerged. No human remains, no battle scar, and no clear sign of violence. Today, renewed archaeological investigation, grounded in Hatteras Island archaeology, map analysis, and forensic science, is redefining our understanding of colonial survival and cultural exchange. In this script, we trace the complete story from the first Roanoke settlement through modern breakthroughs at Site X, weaving in reliable detail, chapter by chapter, in a clear, engaging narrative tone. In April 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh dispatched a fleet of 7 ships and roughly 600 men to establish England's first permanent colony in the New World. Guided by the maps and sketches of artist John White, the expedition reached the Outer Banks, shifting barrier islands off the Carolina coast. By late June, the shallow inlets nearly claimed the flagship's valuable provisions, spoiling much of the supplies and forcing the expedition to leave behind only about 100 settlers on Roanoke Island, rather than the anticipated 600. These first colonists, led by Ralph Lane, set about constructing wooden fortifications and small dwellings. Relations with the local Algonquian-speaking tribes initially appeared cordial, but an unintentional epidemic brought by European pathogens, to which the natives had no immunity, quickly undermined trust. Food shortages mounted as disrupted supply lines left the settlers dependent on tribal goodwill. In addition, strained alliances, suspicion of hostile Powhatan Confederacy involvement, and the lack of promised resources led Lane to request evacuation. By June 1586, after a harsh winter and reports of imminent hostilities, Captain Sir Francis Drake arrived unexpectedly and offered transport back to England. Evacuation was completed in haste. Only 3 colonists were left behind and were never heard from again. Raleigh's first attempt thus ended in failure, leaving a vacant City of the Vines and unanswered questions about the viability of English settlement on Roanoke Island. Undeterred, Raleigh organized a second venture in 1587 with the explicit goal of founding a self-sustaining English outpost. This time, the group included families, craftsmen, farmers, scholars, and even children, totaling 117 individuals, including Governor John White and his pregnant daughter, Eleanor. On August 18, 1587, at a newly chosen site on Roanoke Island, Eleanor paints funds to Virginia Dare, marking the first English child born on American soil. From the outset, however, the colony faced severe challenges. Limited supplies arrived late and in insufficient quantity. The island's marshy terrain complicated agriculture, and simmering tensions with indigenous tribes resurfaced, exacerbated by earlier conflicts. By late August, less than 2 weeks after Virginia Dare's birth, food ran low. John White, bound by duty and compassion, decided to return to England to secure fresh provisions and reinforcements, leaving behind clear instructions. If the colonists abandoned Roanoke Island intentionally, they would carve their destination. If forced by distress, they would add a cross. Written records make no mention of dissent or disorder prior to White's departure, suggesting the plan was agreed upon peacefully. Upon arriving in England, White found himself unexpectedly detained by the Anglo-Spanish War, as Queen Elizabeth I prohibited voyages across the Atlantic to protect against Spanish invasion. Naval resources were scarce, and Raleigh's private funding struggled against royal mandates. Over the next 3 years, White made persistent appeals, and in spring 1590, with Raleigh's support, he finally secured passage on a convoy bound for Virginia. Mid-August 1590, Governor John White's ship approached Roanoke Island under overcast skies. As the vessel neared the west end of the island, plumes of gray smoke rose across a clearing. 2 small boats launched, and cannons were fired to signal the colonists. The smoke turned out to be from a premature campfire or natural brush fire. White's notes do not clarify, but hope fluttered in his chest. Once ashore, White's search party discovered fresh footprints, yet no living settler remained. They pressed northward along the defensive palisade where they found the first carving, CRO, etched into a tree trunk. Further on a sturdy wooden post, appeared the full inscription, CROATOAN. By the agreed code, the absence of a carved cross indicated that the colonists had relocated of their own accord, most likely to Croatoan Island, home of the friendly Croatoan tribe, today's Hatteras Island. White, confident in the colonists' safety, ordered the ship to sail south toward Croatoan Island. However, as the crew prepared to weigh anchor, the cable snapped. With no spare anchor and worsening weather, the ship's captain deemed it unsafe to proceed. Under those circumstances, White reluctantly abandoned his search. The ship returned to England, and the colonists of the lost colony slipped indefinitely into history. Over the next century, rumors and reports trickled back to English readers fascinated by the empty cabins and uprooted fort walls on Roanoke Island. In 1607, when Jamestown was settled further south along Chesapeake Bay, Chief Powhatan reportedly told Captain John Smith of white men living inland, yet Smith's own records mention no confirmation. Later, in 1701, explorer John Lawson visited the Hatteras people on Croatoan Island and recorded tales of pale-skinned ancestors with gray eyes who could read English. Oral legends spoke of a ghost ship, a vessel abandoned by Sir Walter Raleigh's own fleet. In the late 1930s, decades after the first archaeological digs, a series of inscribed stones, purportedly carved by Eleanor Dare, surfaced in North Carolina. Known as the Dare Stones, most proved to be elaborate forgeries. One early stone, however, remained debated for its age and authenticity, describing a tragic death and Mrs. Dare's plea for rescue. Yet without verifiable provenance or scientific dating, the Dare Stones added intrigue, but no certainty to the lost colony narrative. Meanwhile, systematic archaeological excavations on Roanoke Island uncovered abundant 16th century English pottery fragments, brass ornamentation, and glass beads, confirming a sizable settlement. On nearby Hatteras Island, investigators found mixed assemblages of Native American ceramics and small iron scraps known as hammer scale, byproducts of blacksmithing. Although these findings suggested colonial-native collaboration, definitive proof linking the objects to the lost colony remained elusive, potentially lost to shifting sands and sea level rise. In 2011, researchers from the First Colony Foundation re-examined John White's 1585 map entitled La Virginea Pars. Noting subtle patches in the painted surface, they used infrared imaging to reveal concealed symbols. Beneath one patch lay a four-pointed star, a cartographic symbol for a fort, covered by corrections made in the same paint. Above it, an even fainter star drawn in invisible ink marked a second symbol, hinting at a planned but undisclosed fortification approximately 50 miles west of Roanoke Island on the mainland. Designated Site X in subsequent research, this location drew fresh archaeological interest. Ground-penetrating radar surveys identified subsurface anomalies consistent with post-hole patterns. Excavations uncovered small fragments of English stoneware, lead shot, and a few wrought iron pieces. Although no complete structures have been located, these material traces indicate an attempt by some colonists to establish a new stronghold inland, perhaps as part of an agreed relocation plan recorded by John White. Simultaneously, recent digs on Hatteras Island yielded concentrated deposits of iron slag, hammer scale, and primitive charcoal hearths. Metallurgical analysis dated the materials to the late 1580s, confirming the presence of English blacksmiths working alongside Croatoan artisans. Combined with pottery shards from both cultures, this archaeological evidence supports a survival model based on cultural exchange and assimilation rather than massacre or abandonment. The accumulating evidence, cryptic carvings, credible stone artifacts, mixed culture material remains, and cartographic clues at Site X reshapes our understanding of the lost colony of Roanoke. Rather than a tale of wholesale disappearance, a new narrative emerges. English colonists adapting to local conditions, forging alliances with the Croatoan people, and splitting into groups, some relocating to Hatteras Island, others attempting inland fortifications. Their legacy likely endured endures in local oral traditions and possibly in the genetic heritage of coastal tribes. Yet critical questions remain. Where exactly does Site X lie? Will further excavations reveal structural foundations or human remains? Can DNA analysis link Hatteras Island inhabitants to 16th century English settlers? As technology advances, LiDAR scanning, aDNA sequencing, and deeper geophysical surveys, the Roanoke mystery edges closer to resolution. For historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts of American history, the Lost Colony continues to offer a compelling case study in survival, cultural interaction, and the limits of documented evidence. In the coming years, researchers will refine survey methods, expand test pits at promising locations, and apply multidisciplinary techniques to every fragment of pottery or iron slag. Each discovery brings us nearer to completing the story of Roanoke Island, a story that began with hope and hardship in 1587 and remains one of the most enduring puzzles in colonial archaeology. The search continues, and the best chapters may yet lie buried beneath the shifting sands of coastal North Carolina.